Hi, everyone. My name is Winifred Lewis. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Queensland. Do you guys want to introduce yourself? Fiona Foley?
Hi, I'm Fiona Foley. I'm now on staff at the University of Queensland as an associate professor, and I work in the School of Historical and Philosophical Inquiry.
And Fiona Nicoll?
Hi, I'm Fiona Nicoll. I am working and living in Treaty 6 territories, where the University of Alberta is based, and I am a professor in political science there. I was born in Naarm, which is Wurundjeri country, also of Kulin Nations, also known as Melbourne and Victoria.
Great. And you're here because at the time of what we're about to talk about, the Courting Blakness event, all three of us were in the UQ area, and you two led probably one of the biggest Indigenous art events that has ever been held at UQ, and certainly a visual one. In the background of my video is the Great Court of UQ, which is a very beautiful space with an open green, tree and lawn setting, and then entirely surrounded by sandstone pillars that are set in this super European tradition with heraldry in the European style, although it has been subverted if you look closely by the carvers, and there's some really fun animal and human carvings. And so the project, perhaps I'll ask you guys to tell us about how you transformed the Great Court and the UQ campus.
I might start. It really was a project where I was invited because of a new appointment that came about through Fiona Nicoll. Was pivotal in establishing and asking if I came on board as an adjunct professor, and it was approved by the Senate, I believe. And a part of that appointment was to create an art exhibition in the Great Court. So I invited 8 artists to make a work specifically for the Great Court. Some of the work had already been made, like the films, and then we positioned them in the Great Court, which was screened over 2 consecutive nights. And the project, for me, I started as an adjunct professor in 2011, but the project was not realised until 2014. So it was 3 years of, from my perspective, it was a labour of love, but then it got very tenacious determination on my part, and possibly Fiona Nicoll's part, because there was so much pushback at various points to the actual project, and I didn't understand what all the fear was about. So maybe Fiona Nicoll can talk a little bit more about that, because she was ensconced as an employee of the University of Queensland.
Yeah. Fiona, how did you come to be involved, Fiona Nicoll, and what was your perspective on it?
I'd been working in Sydney, and I got my first tenured position at the University of Queensland. And I was really struck by the university's Great Court. I'd actually done previous research on the Australian War Memorial, which is a building of a similar time frame. And so I was aware of some of the politics of that underpinned the aesthetics of that period between the wars. And it had been said in passing, it's like a great example of fascist architecture, it's very grand and, I didn't realise actually that the architect, Jack Hennessy, had been inspired by Adolf Hitler's writing on art.
No.
John East is a historian who's written about the Great Court, but this was quite common, because this was before the atrocities of Nazi Germany had been exposed. And so I was really struck, with that background, looking at particularly the artworks and the carvings on the Great Court, and also a painting that is inside the building by one of the war artists, Arthur Murch, which is titled "The Art of Peace," and it's of a ceremony by an Aboriginal. By an anthropologist. And all of these images were taken from different parts of Australia, not from Queensland. It wasn't until later that I met the second Great Court carver who worked in the 70s, and she was using the diaries of colonialists about the foods and that Indigenous people ate, and she put those on the archway for the Mickey building. So I was just interested in this space, and I was disturbed by the space. At the same time, I became aware that Fiona Foley, who was an artist whose work I had always admired and whose art I found really transformative, she did a work called The Lie of the Land, which was an installation in front of the Melbourne Town Hall about the treaty by John Batman that was subsequently invalidated. And that had made an enormous impression on me. So when I found out that Fiona Foley lived in Brisbane, I made contact with her. And I began to invite her to speak to a course that I taught in cultural studies every year. And so it was we had many conversations, and I think then we spoke with other faculty who were interested, also students and other staff members, including yourself, I think it's at one point, who were interested in challenging the way that the university represented itself through this Great Court, which was also modelled on, the British universities of Oxford and Cambridge, and they even have a race, an annual race as part of, something that students do. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess my dim memory is that it was a multi-year struggle to get this project running. And I feel like the university, it wasn't really excited. I should say that different people within the university, as is often the case in these projects, were really excited from the beginning and could get behind you and your vision. Some other people in psychology, that our listeners and readers would know, like Michelle Nezik and Paul Harnett. But the institutional support wasn't that strong. So do you want to talk a little bit, both Fiona's, but maybe starting with you, Fiona Foley, about what you felt helped to get the project off the ground, and what the barriers were that you had to push through?
What helped was my close friendship with Fiona Nicoll, because I didn't understand the university and how it was structured, and I didn't know all of the people within those various schools and faculties that were supportive and were going to use what we were doing in their course structures. And just reading the report after the event, it engaged with 800 students. So that's a lot of undergraduates who participated at various levels, either writing about it or becoming volunteers. And I think Fiona gathered a lot of momentum of support because she was teaching there in MSAR at the time, where I was more coming and going from the university as an adjunct. And so she understood the machinations much better than I did. But what I brought was a level of politics when there was pushback to the project, where I felt free enough to say, well, if this doesn't happen, I will go to the press. Or if this doesn't happen, I will engage a barrister. And I just had no qualms about that, because that's how I've fought things previously as a freelance artist. I'd either engage a lawyer or I'd go to the press. And I think it was a little bit of a shock to senior staff when I put that forward, because then they had to think very seriously about the way they were trying to push back on the project. And
Yeah,
because
sorry, go on.
they didn't understand that you couldn't say no to me because I'm such a determined person. And I just, if there's an obstacle in the way, I try and move around it. And that's how I've been taught all my life, because my mother worked with politicians in the state government alongside government to get a big project up on Fraser Island. And she was an astute politician. So I had 20 years of her trying to get land back on Fraser Island. So she was an excellent teacher, and I observed all of that. So when courting Blakness, senior staff to try to push back on the project, it was not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that you guys put forward in the project were really very powerful symbols. So am I right that it was among the first times that the Aboriginal flags were ever raised over the Great Court through this project?
Not exactly.
Okay.
So what happened was those flags had been there for some time, but the original conception of the artist Archie Moore, who worked together on this concept with an anthropologist, Sally Babbage, on maps of Queensland, and that anthropologist was the first anthropologist to use the word nations in relation to Indigenous peoples. So that conception was to have been in dialogue with all of the flags on the Forgan Smith Tower, the flag of Queensland, the flag of the university, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag, as well as the Australian flag. And that was where pushback was most severe. I think the early obstacles we encountered, I think were around finance, where we bought quite a lot of money to the project, but we needed more money, to support the project. And what we found was there were people across the university who really wanted this to happen. And what I loved about the project is it actually brought a submerged university into presence. And that lasted throughout the project. It was an absolutely beautiful thing. But on the other hand, like that pushback at having this conversation between different conceptions of what does it mean to be a nation, which is what Archie Moore's work had been dealing with, the relationship between nation and identity, way before he started to do this work with courting Blakness. That was difficult because we didn't understand the reasons for the resistance to this, and nobody would tell us, and we were never given an opportunity to explain why the artist had done this work, why this was a really valuable, not just artistic, but academic project, and to understand what the basis of concerns were. There is no law that prevents other flags from existing beside or near those official flags.
Yeah, and I think from the outside, it just seems like such a self-evident and an amazing thing. And there were many works of art, right? Like, do you guys want to? I feel like maybe we skipped one of the questions I was supposed to ask, which was, what was courting blackness? So, if I give my perspective, it was kind of arts that were all around the Great Court artwork, and it included these amazing visual prompts to think about the university, the nation, self, Indigenous peoples and settlers. And so I think the obstacles from the uni perspective kind of range from the bureaucratic, like it's hard to get anything done at the university because, as you guys know, the university is kind of a collection of hundreds of autonomous units, semi-autonomous units embedded in a bureaucracy of entrenched and stifling power, as well as financial because you needed money, and political because, in fact, we still are struggling with our racist heritage and racist people in positions of power. And at the time, we had a conservative government, and there's a sensitivity around seeming too political, as if it's political to question whiteness, but not political to actually embody it. So just coming back to those facilitating obstacles and facilitating factors and obstacles, like I thought involving the students was really important. There was a survey, I think, that some psychologists helped Fiona Nicoll run that, kind of brings in this idea of student-centered research. And there's a teaching element, as you said, the courses, multiple courses, like signed up to the project and said they were going to use the art in their courses. And there's a research aspect because based on your experience, Fiona Foley, you had previously run a successful model where there was a kind of symposium associated with the event and then a publication out of it. And in fact, you've got the book there, I believe. You guys want to show it for the readers? Yeah. You may like to look at this if you're interested in the project.
University of Queensland Press.
Yeah. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about how you defeated the obstacles in your way and what the lessons would be for young activists? Fiona Foley, I'll start with you.
Never take no for an answer. So, I always had a clear path in my mind that there would, in association to the artwork being physically installed in the Great Court, there would also be a symposium. And the symposium looked at the totality of all 8 artists, and there were speakers on panel that talked about each of the artworks, and there were scholarly papers that were presented. And then the other outcome that I always write into big projects like this is the publication, because the publication will stand alone after the event has closed or finished. And the publication is the go-to after the event. And so for me, that's vitally important to have that record, because if we didn't have that record, then the university could quite easily sweep all of that work under the carpet. And so for me, it's lasting testimony that this was a very important project, and students coming through the University of Queensland now can reflect upon that time through the publication.
Yeah. And what about you, Fiona M?
Yeah, the quality and the power of art was a really big takeaway for me. These artists really brought their best work, and that work has continued, like, beyond the project. And I think my advice to young activists is you really have to think about the long game, because you are as likely to be attacked and, even bullied as you are to be given thanks if you
Oh, yeah.
try to do anything like this. So just be aware of that. I mean, and take the beautiful moments, So I want to like, if I can talk about the beautiful moments, it's just, I remember the moment, that morning I walked into work and the works were on the site and it felt so different. That space felt so different. And watching how people were throughout that time was really different. People engaged with the space in a really different way. They a whole lot of selfies. We had volunteers on site. That was amazing. So it wasn't just the students sort of being taught about it in the classrooms. It was also a wonderful PhD student, Catherine Lawrence, organised a volunteer program. And so you had students explaining their understanding of the works with other students. For example, there was this big gallery of Australia's former prime ministers, photographs who had these Indigenous features sort of superimposed on them. And, people found that really fascinating, and, they would try to explain that.
Just to jump in, sorry,
yes.
I think most of our viewers will already know, but at the time, of course, Australia's prime ministers were exclusively white men.
And with one white woman, Julia Gillard.
Okay, exactly.
So there was one white woman there. And another interesting part of that story is the artist, Michael Cook, had been a photographer of like wedding events and things that usually happen in the Great Court. So it was also such a really great kind of way for, him to engage with the Great Court in a really different way. So those moments, were really incredible. And the other really, like I was telling Fiona before this conversation, actually, something that was incredibly moving for me was to see what happened with Archie Moore's works that ran into so much difficulty, and how he was commissioned, not commissioned, but like his work and others were brought together, flags, and purchased by the Sydney International Airport. And when you leave the country, like you go through these hanging flags, and it is like, for anyone who understands like how these works came into being, it's such a powerful and enduring presence. So I would say, if you're engaging with art, and I think with young activists, I think actually young activists do engage with art a lot, even more so today than during the times of courting blackness, perhaps. I don't know, but it's just, you have to sort of continue to be energized and take inspiration from the art itself, because that's what's going to get you through some really, really difficult times.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the other thought, when we were talking before, you mentioned as well some kind of specific moments that helped to like push the project across the line. And Fiona, and you were talking about finding the seed funding. So obviously you guys had already like brought together this amazing effort, but UQ did need to chip in, and the way that happened was a very interesting story, I thought. Do you want to tell that story now, or?
I'll just talk about it briefly, and then Fiona Foley might want to follow up on her experience, because some of it we did together. But it was a matter of finding people within the institution who were in positions of cultural power and also institutional power in the executive, who really liked the vision and who really wanted to see this happen. And one of those people actually saw us in his office, and he said, look, there's two ways I can help you. One way is the official way. The other way is I'm going to reach into my pocket. I'm going to write you a really large check. And I then want you to tell everybody that I wrote this really large check. And that's exactly what we did. And it was very effective. I was like, oh, he did that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we can find a little bit here and a little bit there.
Yeah, and I think we call that champions in research on organizational change, but putting your money where your mouth is. Like, so he personally wrote a check, and then the other people in the institution, with that evidence of his commitment, followed his lead, even if they weren't. But there were others that didn't. Like, I tried to get psychology to chip in financially, and although there were a number of us that were interested, psychology did not support the project. And I'm mentioning that because this is a video for psychologists on Affiliation Week. It's like, actually, we couldn't get over the line institutionally in our department. And I think reflecting on why that is, it was seen as not psychological enough, something that's really quite mystifying from the point of view of like an event which is about perceptions of identity and nation. Anyways, that's ancient history now. Fiona Foley, what would you add to that?
Well, that was a really pivotal moment because I just saw a glimmer of hope, and that particular staff member had a wand on his desk, and it was like he sprinkled magic dust. So it was like we took flight after that, and two Fiona fairies went off and created more magic. And then we wrote a grant application for Arts Queensland, and that grant, just roughly around $70,000 came in, and then various other people sort of chipped in about 5,000 each from different organisations and departments at UQ. And so we sort of knew that we had the project would come to fruition, and that was really exciting. And also it was exciting to see the artists develop work for the space and take us on this other trajectory of engaging with sort of really politicized work, but it wasn't overly in your face. It was like nuanced work. And so I'm thinking, for instance, like Exchange, the big sculpture by Ryan Presley, and the denominations, the Australian bills, are like the $10 bill, the $100 bill. And, people came and helped put the stickers on each of those letters. And I remember I had the $100 bill and I'd put it on the surface. And just working with the artist, there was like, the question of, do I put the stickers on randomly, or am I supposed to go like, in a specific way? And he was so pedantic that, you had to go in a specific way. You couldn't just do slap it here and slap it there. And so it was interesting to watch the artist's methodology by simply working with them hands-on. And seeing, what I loved also was seeing both Archie and Ryan deliver papers at the symposium and how well thought out they were. And, you can read about it in the publication. So only yesterday I was reading Archie Moore's essay, and it was just like so nuanced, that particular work, the flags. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see all 14 fly. We only got to see 10 fly. And I think it was a missed opportunity by the university at that level, but it was also a missed opportunity because I did offer the artwork to UQ Art Museum to have first purchase of the work, but they declined that. And then it went in 2018, he created more flags. He moved from 14 flags to 28. And then it was bought by the international airport in Sydney, and it hangs there permanently. And I think what a fitting home for it. So, you know, the project went on to live in other ways. But what's nice is, you know, on the website for that work, Archie, even though there was another version of it, he does acknowledge the Courting Blakness project and my role as the curator on that project in all of his public statements. So that's nice to have that validation and to see the work live in that international space.
Yeah. And I guess like that's another thing we could talk about. We've just got a few minutes left, but what do you guys see as the legacy of the project for yourself, for the uni, and for the students and artists? We could probably talk for another hour on that question, but I know you've written a whole book about it, but just the short version. Fiona Nicoll, I'll start with you and then I'll finish with you, Fiona Foley, as the last word.
Okay, I would say that it happened and it changed the university in some subtle way. And so I would say that, but I would also say that the archive it's left behind through Black Words and Auslit is there, and it is part of the university's institutional history. So both that moment made change and that it is now part of what the university is.
And for those that don't know, those are two big databases that you can search, so you can actually look back on the art and look on, you know, see recordings and so on. Fiona Foley, what are your thoughts to take us out?
Well, it's interesting for me now, like we're nearly 10 years down the track after the project. Next year will be 10 years, 2024. And it's still being used by various academics in the humanities at UQ, and probably even more strongly than it was when it was first created. So I think it's had a lasting impact on various staff at UQ. So that's really good to see.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to finish the recording now, and I'll just say thanks to the viewers for being with us. And if you Google Courting Blakness without the C, though, right? So BLAK, you'll be able to see the art and find the book. All right. Bye now.